Hello, humans. We've had a few episodes on treating emotions by using other emotions. And so I also wanted to talk about treating emotions with herbs and constraint and stuff like that. At least, a few examples, a few cases. So here we go. From Gujin An, which is a Qing Dynasty collection of medical cases. For no reason, a woman could not stop crying from sorrow. Someone said she had an evil spirit. She prayed to ask for protection, but there was no response. So, they told her she had an evil spirit. So now she's praying for help. But then Xu Shuwei, who was was it Song or Yuan Dynasty scholar, and he was sometimes called Scholar Shu. He said, Jingui Yaolei says a woman with agitated organs or zhangzhao, which is sometimes called restless organ. Anyway, so she has this condition that was first written about in Jingui Yaolei, restless organ or agitated organs. She has injury from joy and sorrow, and she wants to cry. But it looks like she was made to do this by a god or a deity. It doesn't make sense when outsiders look at it, so they think it was some spirit or something. There's frequent yawning and stretching. This is governed by Ganmai Datsao Tang, which is, a Jingguo prescription. He used 14 doses of it and she recovered. So actually, why was this woman crying from sorrow? I mean, maybe she was what we would call clinically depressed, but maybe she got married off. This is a married woman, the character there is for a married woman. Maybe her husband was mean to her. Maybe she missed her natal family. Maybe she had things she wanted to do and wasn't able to do. Maybe her mother-in-law was mean to her. There's probably a reason, but the cases written by men don't seem to care too much about the reason for her sorrow. There's another couple cases where Tan Yun Shen is the doctor. She's a woman, female doctor of the Ming Dynasty, and I've got some cases up there from her. And she's always so concerned with the emotional state of the patient who is a woman. And so there really is a difference. The male doctors, she's just angry, she's just crying for no reason. So anyway, well, Wujin Ianan continues, this must be because sorrow belongs to the lungs. The classic says, more or less Suwen chapter 5, the West is lungs among the zang, among the yin organs. It's sorrow among the zhi, which is, the zhi, the five minds, or really the five element emotions. Anyway, it also says in Suan chapter 23, when Jing and Qi combine in the lungs, there's sorrow. This formula supplements the spleen, but it can treat lung disease. This is the meaning of supplementing the mother when there's deficiency, because spleen is earth and lungs are metal. So he's explaining the mechanism of the formula. Okay. Then we have a case from Shuiji. Actually, I think we have three cases in this episode from Shuiji. He wrote a book, New Ke Yao, which is, I titled it, An Outline of Female Medicine. This is translated by me and published by Chinese Medicine Database. So you could look for it online if, you're interested in more. And so here, this is a case in volume 1, the second condition and the second case under the second condition. That's what those numbers are. Anyway, a 64-year-old woman had constrained anger for a long time with headaches and fever and chills or sensations of cold and heat. In the spring, sometimes she had pain inside her breasts. She took herbs like Liuqi Yinzi, which is, again, I don't always look up all of these formulas. This is a wrong formula. Her symptoms increased a lot, but we can tell it's a qi moving formula from the name. So her symptoms increased a lot, and then she started bleeding as if she were menstruating, but irregularly and at no particular time. Sometimes when you move qi, you move blood. She was also greatly frightened and didn't eat or drink. Her sleep was not peaceful at night. Her breasts were swollen, and both rib sides flared up with pain as if they were roasting, and her complexion was red in the afternoons. So we can see she has heat. Sounds like she has some yin deficiency. At that time, they might say blood deficiency instead of yin deficiency. Anyway, she's like all messed up. Shuiji took this as constrained fire of the liver and spleen with blood dryness. Okay, so I think you know what liver qi constraint is. Shuiji also talked about spleen constraint. And, at first I thought that was liver attacking the spleen. So the constraint was of the liver, but the spleen was receiving the problem from the liver. But actually, he talks about spleen constraint as a thing, So now we've got two constrained organs that can't move freely due to emotions. And when things don't move freely, fire builds up because chi builds up, and chi is warm. So when chi builds up, too much warmth builds up, and then there's fire. Shueiji talks about constraint a lot for women. Constraint actually was, in Neijing, they didn't talk about constraint as something that happened from emotions and happened to the liver. In fact, they didn't really talk about it for 1,000 years. And then by the Ming Dynasty, Shuiji's talking about it a lot. Okay, and so blood dryness. So it doesn't say yin deficiency, it says blood dryness, which is something that, in the Ming Dynasty, they, talk when we would say yin deficiency, they often talked about a blood issue rather than yin deficiency. So he used 2 doses of Xiaoyaosan, adding some Longdan Sao because there's liver fire that was stir fried with rice wine to make it not quite so cold and bitter until blackened, because blackened herbs stop bleeding. And 1.5 qian of Jirza. So another heat clearing herb. So also, Shuiji was really the first to popularize Xiaoyaosan. Before that, it was came from the Song Dynasty formula book, Taiping Huimin Heji Zhufang. That was the first time it was written, but it really wasn't commonly used until Shuiji, and Shuiji used it a lot, even sometimes for men. And after that, it just became more and more popular. But he's the first doctor I've come across that really, the earliest doctor that really liked Xiaoyao-san. So, and he especially gave it to a lot of women who had emotional stuff going on. The swelling and pain of her breasts immediately receded. Also, I guess her rib sides had some. And after a couple more doses, it had completely dispersed. So when that part was better, he used guipitang, adding stir-fried jirzi and beimu, and all of her symptoms completely recovered. So first he's treating the liver with Xiaoyao-san, and then later he's treating the spleen. And his modifications help to clear the heat or the fire of the liver qi constraint, and also stop the bleeding a little by using a blackened herb. Yeah. He's actually the first one to use the standard Jiaowei Xiaoyao-san. He kind of invented that, although this wasn't that. Okay, here's another case from Shuiji. A widow had abdominal distension, ribside pain, internal heat, late afternoon fever, irregular menstruation, aching and numbness of her body, and she spit phlegm all the time, whenever. Perhaps she used herbs to clear chi and transform phlegm, but then she suffered inhibited throat, so qi wasn't moving well in her throat. And also green and yellow vaginal discharge and inflated abdomen, so like distension and maybe gas and stuff like that. Distended rib sides. And she used more prescriptions to move qi, but her chest and diaphragm became inhibited, and sometimes her body was numb. So, we're seeing she's using herbs again to move qi, and in the previous one, she was using herbs to move qi. Shuiji does not like focusing on moving qi. He really was the first doctor of the warm supplementation school, and he perceived virtually everything as a deficiency. So yeah, he'd use gently moving formulas like Xiaoyao San, but he didn't like just formulas to move qi because he thought they were too harsh, and he viewed most things as deficiency. He'd generally start with a formula for deficiency, and if there were some aspects of excess, he'd add in herbs to treat the excess, whereas other doctors might start with the formula for excess and add in a few herbs for the deficiency part, but he always put the deficiency as the primary thing. Okay, so she's got all these symptoms. Again, he says this is constrained anger damaging the liver and spleen. The previous herbs increased the damage a lot, he says. In the mornings, I use Guipi Tang to resolve constraint of the spleen and engender spleen qi. And in the evenings, I use Jiaowei Xiaoyao San to engender liver blood and clear liver fire. She took more than 100 doses of both at the same time, like in not one first and then the other some future time period, but like in the same days she was taking both, and all of her symptoms recovered. So in this case, he used Guipi Tang first and in the mornings and Xiaoyao San in the evening, whereas in the previous case he used Xiaoyao San for a time period first and then he used Guipi Tang. So those were some of his favorite formulas that he used again and again and again. And yeah, he often used more than one formula in a day. So now these are two cases that have to do with eating disorders. At least that's how we'd classify it today. This case is also going to be in my discussion of Wendan Tang, but it also belongs here. So it's short. You can hear it twice if you're listening. Because she was obstinate, unmarried girl suffered binding constraint of the spleen. Again, here's spleen constraint, but this is from a different doctor. This is from Gujin Yitong Dachuan by Dr. Shu Chun Fu. Anyway, so she didn't eat for half a year. She would, her spleen's not happy. So, one of the symptoms is going to be not wanting to eat. She would only eat cooked water chestnuts and several datsao, dates each day. If she was really happy and doing something wild, she also ate a steamed bun the size of a marble. She hated rice porridge. This was spleen constraint. It could not be scattered without Zhishe, the herb. And so I treated her with Wendan Tang because Zhishe is one of the herbs in it, removing the juru, and I guess they didn't want so much heat clearing or something. Anyway, she was at ease after several tens of doses. So that's kind of weird. She doesn't have, she doesn't have like lack of courage or fright. She doesn't have insomnia or palpitations. She doesn't have the standard Wendan Tang stuff. But anyway, it seemed to work in this case. And we have a young married woman did not eat because of contrary thoughts or wishes. In other words, she wasn't getting her way. Note that all of these cases about emotions are in women because men felt women were emotional, too emotional, and men felt women were angry and sulky and jealous and so forth. And so they perceived, they perceived conditions in women being due to emotions quite often. And, of course, sometimes they were. And of course, these women could be very unhappy and frustrated with the way they were treated. But anyway, so she didn't eat because of contrary thoughts or wishes. She had fullness of the diaphragm, and month after month, she became more and more fatigued. She had fever and a red face that began at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. time period. The fever came down, and then she had frequent dribbling urination at the 5 to 7 p.m. period, which is the kidneys' time, isn't it? Her pulse was deep, weak, and short. She menstruated each month, but only a few drops. Dr. Shu said, this is Qi constraint with blood deficiency, because her menstruation was so light, I guess. The central palace is held back by food stagnation that engenders phlegm. What is the central palace? The spleen and stomach. And so there's food stagnation because there's chi constraints. So chi isn't moving, so food isn't being processed, food isn't moving. And then when food doesn't move and fluids don't move, they get turbid and engender phlegm. So these are the things he said about her. I then used supplementing and draining treatment at the same time because she was blood deficient, but she also had food stagnation, constraint, and so forth. So I used ginseng and baiju as the ruler, although those sound like for qi deficiency, right? With Chenpi, Fuling, and Honghua to deal with the stagnation and the stasis and the, dampness as the assistant and envoy. This was boiled into a condensed decoction and taken before meals. The herbs acted in a short time, and she ate half a small bowl of porridge. The thing that's here should be a relatively small bowl, okay? In another short while, I gave her some other herbs, Shenyo Wan. Again, I'm not always researching all of the formulas that are mentioned, especially if they're things that we're not going to use today. Decreasing the Qing Fan and the Qianyu. Qianyu is like morning glory seeds, and that gives you drastic diarrhea. So I guess he wanted to get rid of the food stagnation and the phlegm and all that kind of stuff. So he's supplementing and moving up here, and then he's like really giving her horrible diarrhea after a while. She swallowed 15 tiny pills with her saliva. Night and day, she took 4 doses of each of these 2 medicines. And then she began eating, and the fever abated, and she recovered in 7 days. So, okay, those are a few cases of conditions like constraint and maybe some other emotions that were treated with herbal therapy.